Hello, this will be part 5. Now, in the part 4, I went through a list based around the Washington Square Arch connection, especially through Freemasons, and then linked that to the Eiffel Tower, Statue of Liberty, lots of connections, of course, very Masonic, and the Woolworth building by Cass Gilbert, and how these all reflect, especially Sun, Earth and Moon, New Jerusalem, weights and measures. But now we'll go back to the Washington Square Arch, of course, a memorial to George Washington. It's that's dedicated to that reason, but and extend that a little further. And so first we'll go to the Washington Memorial in Washington D.C., of course named after George Washington, founding father, Freemason. But we'll look at again these numbers, but we'll draw some connections and show how it connects, of course, to New York being the basis of this particular series. Now, the Washington Monument itself is 555 feet or 6,660 inches. Now, the immediate connection might be to go off into El Diablo and all this type of stuff, but it's actually not that. There's much more to it than that. So if we go back to New York, the Freedom Tower in the World Trade Center, 1776 feet, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, 1776. That measurement will convert to 6,660 Doric palms, the same as the Washington Monument, or 66,600 Ionic cubits. The Doric and the Ionic column in Freemason tracing board, something I've gone through. Go back to episode 1 of this series, the master apartment building designed by the architect Harvey Wiley Corbett, but lots of it's basically the Ghostbusters building, but at 444 feet it converts to 1776 palms or 6,660 Doric inches. 1776, 6,660. We see these connections. Now, the architect for the master apartment building was Harvey Wiley Corbett, a Freemason, but it was built, funded by the Freemason Louis Horch, built for the Theosophist Nicholas Roerich. Nicholas Roerich Museum, just a few blocks up from there on Riverside Drive. But Harvey Wiley Corbett, also the architect of the George Washington National Masonic Memorial, another temple of sun, earth, moon, ancient symbolisms, all the same sort of things, just going through it again. But the base of the Washington Monument, 55 foot square, it tapers up, and the square at the top is 35 square, a square of 35 feet. So 35, 55 creates a 7 to 11 ratio. Back to the Statue of Liberty, 7 diadems on the top and built on an 11-pointed star. That's 711 is the ratio of the Great Pyramid, which gives us half pi and the golden ratio. So 55 divided by 35 is half pi. Back to the Washington Square Arch, 55 stars, 42 small and 13 large. 13 large, but 42 interestingly. Also in New York, the George Washington Bridge. Now, the main span is 3,500 feet. The top of the Washington Monument is 35 feet. But it's more, you might think, coincidence, but it's not, because we go a little bit further. Now, from the deck, the towers on the George Washington Bridge, from the deck, 377 feet high. The Washington Monument was not built on the axis. It's 377 feet off axis. Now, I'll put a link in the description to this video, because I'll go into some things that just haven't been discussed in this area, also including the Pentagon, and how this will create alignment as well. So those, and there'll be other links in the description as well, but 377 feet, George Washington Bridge, 55, the monument, 377, George Washington Monument. These will go through. Now, there's a very important reason for these numbers, and we'll begin with the 55 stars and the 55 foot square base. 55, for instance, is the 10th Fibonacci number, so it brings us to the fire spiral. It's also the 10th Chartres number, and by that I mean 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, etc., up to 10 gives us 55. It's also a beautiful number in the second dimension. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 squared gives us 55 as well. Now, this will link to some other very important features, and I'll cover them more in the future, but I have done a shorter video on that. The link to that will be in the description because it connects so many places, including Sydney, Astana, and elsewhere. So 55, 35, and 377 linked through Geoerge Washington in Washington D.C, but also in New York. 377 is the 12th Fibonacci number, 55 is the 10th, 377 is the 14th Fibonacci number, 144, another one of these repeated numbers, is the 12th Fibonacci, and 144 is 12 squared, but we'll go into that more in the future. But the USS Washington, 377 feet long, and well, it's 44 feet wide, the full width of it. But 33, but it's actually 34, and 34 is the Fibonacci before 55. So another Fibonacci reference. The Peking Museum in New York, the ship there in the museum, 377 feet long. The Statue of Liberty, there are 370 steps from the lobby to the crown. Sticking in New York, the Bronx, or the Whitestone Bridge, towers are 377 feet high. The total bridge is 3,770 feet long. Now this will bring us back to, well, many other connections, but of most interest is Sydney Harbour Bridge, total length 3,770 feet long, same as the Bronx Whitestone Bridge. And this number in New York is not just, or Washington, is not just a one-off. You'll see it repeated in so many other places. Now, I'll also put a link to the video which I've done on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, because this will also connect us to 55 and 144, the Fibonacci numbers that we see here. It's a pattern which extends back centuries, also the modern period, but going back in time and across the world. The Eiffel Tower also connects us to the Statue of Liberty, and the second level is 377 feet high. The Gallery of the Machines, which was also meant to be in Paris as well, many other places. Chartres Cathedral, one of the holy of holies of neology, of sacred architecture, is 377 feet high. But again, you might say coincidence, but if we go over to the Cathedral of Reims, and the nave 377 feet long, and the width of the nave 144 hands. Once more, the Fibonacci numbers, 144 being the 12th, 377 being the 14th Fibonacci number. This will continue like Voortrekker Monument. I had a video up, I pulled it down because I made a few errors, but I'll put back that up because that includes 55. There are 377 steps in total. It's based on the mansion of Ben, the primate Egyptian creation myth. It's loaded with other symbols, but focus on New York. So we have, and there are many other references to 55 and the important buildings that I have brought up, and I'll bring up more in the future series. But 377 and 55, it's very Masonic. I don't want to pick on them. The Masons are one stream of this school of knowledge. Now, the Fibonacci numbers in themselves are a beautiful series of numbers which lead us to the golden ratio in the second dimension, golden ratio in the third dimension, for instance, we see there. But also I have a description of the sun, as you might sort of notice up there, and also put a link to a bunch of videos I've done on Fibonacci spirals, how to draw them, how to examine them on do-it-yourself on Excel, etc. But the sun there in long rods 26181818. Well, quick link back. I'll again in the future I'll go more and more into the Twin Towers and the World Trade Center. But at 1728 feet, the height of the North Tower, including the 360-foot mast, 26181818. The diameter of a sun in long rods, 261818181818. That's phi squared, phi plus 1, as defined by the ratio of the ideal numbers of the Great Pyramid. Now, the phi spiral is very powerful artistic tool. Now, not exactly, there's a lot of debate in regards to this, but it certainly is very, very important in nature. For instance, pie cones and shells and so many other things. But it's one of the most beautiful numbers in that phi squared equals phi plus 1. 1 divided by phi equals phi minus 1. This is the only number that this happens with. It's perfect. But it also describes so much of nature. But sticking with geometry for a second, the pentagram or the pentagon is a perfect representation of phi. Even the angles in trigonometry will bring us to the golden ratio, 108, 72, 306. It's artists have known about it for a long time. It's a beautiful way to format and composition on photographs. Now the Great Pyramid is a phi ratio as well. Now I've done some videos on it. I'll include the link in the description, phi and the Great Pyramid, because the Great Pyramid is based on phi and it existed a long time before they'll admit to it. Eden Project in Cornwall, this is another example of the phi ratio being used in architecture. Lider Atomica by Dali has all these features, the pentagon or the pentagram being used to compose the image and therefore to give it this added quality. But if we go up to galactic scale, the spirals in galaxies have the phi ratio in them. And now it's not just a one-off, you'll find it in many of them. Not all of them, but a great deal, much more than what a random world will describe. It's pretty much of a standard, if you want to put it in many ways. But as we come down to smaller scales, well, we see it in hurricanes or typhoons or cyclones, depending on what part of the world you're in. And well, here is for instance, here's an image now. Again, it just perfectly fits for phi ratio. It just now. Sunflowers. Who doesn't like sunflowers? Well, sunflowers are just one more example in nature of how this phi spiral is built in. But it's not just the spiral itself; it's even the number of petals. Now, typically, not always, because there are always, nature's variations always, but 34, 55, or 89 petals, which are Fibonacci numbers. But even if the petals don't match that, you'll find that where the seeds form will create these phi spirals as well. But you'll find it not just in sunflowers and so many other flowers, but in many plants. In nature lends itself to this. Nature wants this. This is how nature operates. Now, for instance, pine cones are another example of it, and even seed, dandelions, anyway, but this phi spiral appears over and over again in the macro through to the micro. You're going to find the spiral appearing in shells. Now, I've got the links in the video because I'll talk a little bit more, because there are these variations in it. If you try and be really strict about it, it doesn't work. But nature doesn't work in that way. Shells is another example of how so often nature will come to this phi spiral passion fruit flowers. So there's 3 little purple nodes, and then there are 5 around, and 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34 are the Fibonacci numbers. As we build, so you can get example 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144. These are the Fibonacci spirals. Now, there was a couple of years ago, there was a series called Dig, which sort of went into this whole area of mythology, sacred architecture. It was an interesting series. But what was of most note was that the main characters drove around in this car, and they went, and the filming went to extraordinary lengths to sneak in this number plate 1618. That's phi 1618033, and even if it was only for a fraction of a second, if you watch the series, you'll see how often they get this in shot. Now, when they film these series, they don't just randomly point the camera in any direction. This was done deliberately. It was a subtle hint, and you'll see this through so much of artwork going back centuries, but even in modern TV and film. Now, another example, J.J. Abrams, famous now, for instance, you've redone Star Wars and Star Trek. But in his series Fringe, he even brings up the golden number in, or phi, or the divine proportion, however you want to call it. He has multiple references throughout, and I'll put the link to the description to one particular piece of the episode where they literally show how this happens. Now, it's interesting how some people, in Hollywood or entertainment industry, will insert this and use this in subtle and not so subtle ways, but it's built into nature. So there are some people who are pushing towards us, but now there is a very good math series, I think it's worth watching, by Marcus de Sordoy, by the BBC. However, he does a segment on spirals and he goes out of his way not to mention or discuss it, even though he goes through sunflowers, horns, all the things that are built on fire. This guy goes out of his way not to mention them in the series. I can't believe how often the BBC is engaged in what else I can call is what I suspect is gatekeeping. I think Kurt Gödel had quite a bit to say on that there are some who want to keep you in the dark. Now, this was another prime example of this series. I'll let the clip play, but yeah, gatekeeping at its most gatekeepiness.
And all manner of weird hocus pocus that I can't begin to understand. It's mixed together in a mysterious baroque scene. Of course, it's all nonsense, really silly. But what isn't nonsense is the atmosphere of whole.
So this guy is one of your classic gatekeepers. He lays out the pattern and goes, it's pure nonsense. But the plan is not pure nonsense. It's actually quite well known. However, poisoning the well, classic example of poisoning the well, classic example of gatekeeper. Now, what I find of interest is in regarding to the ring that he's wearing. Now, this I have to include it. I didn't want to, but I think it's worth noting because again, he's alluding to something here. I'm quite sure of it. Now, perhaps the ring is something else, but he is a gatekeeper. He's no better than Zoe Hawass and all these other high-paid guys who get promoted by certain elements of the mainstream media to basically downplay all these sorts of things. They use terms, oh, well, it's nonsense, but they don't tell you, they don't show you the measurements and the proportions, and these gatekeeper guys are just nasty. There's no other word for it. But anyway, we do a review. I've got, if you follow the links, I've done so many other videos on this. This is a global plan. It's in plain sight. It's testable. It's measurable. It's repeated across the ages. It's repeated across cultures. There is no denying this. In a random world, it would not happen. But guys like Hawass and that Valdemar will keep telling you it's nonsense, it's a coincidence. But they're gatekeepers, or they're incompetent. One way or another, they're not to be trusted. Anyway, with that, I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one, and lots more to come.